Please be seated. The court is now back in session. Before I hand the floor to the defense teams, I'd like to inquire judges of the bench if you have any question to put to this civil party. Judge Lavange, you may proceed.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. President. Good afternoon, Mr. Pignatai. I'm Jean-Marc Laverne, trial chamber judge. I have just a short number of questions in follow-up to some of the things you were saying this morning. First, let's turn to the evacuation of Phnom Penh. Now, if I understood you correctly, you said that you made a stop at the Phnom Penh Law Faculty. Is that true? And can you tell us how long you stayed there and if any particular events took place while you were there? For example, were you witness to any arrests of people? Thank you.
I left Phnom Penh on the 18th in the morning, and around 1 p.m. in the afternoon I reached the law faculty, and we decided to enter the faculty, and we stayed on the first floor of the building in that faculty. We stayed there for 3 days. During the period that we stayed there, I met several people whom I knew, and we talked about other things. I did not witness any arrest, but I'm sure arrest took place. As I met in the afternoon the former Minister of Defense, who was also and the former Minister of Public Works, who were my superior, and that was Mr. Thapana En. He was with his family, and there was also a Colonel Ummon who was with him. And he spoke a lot about politics. Of course, I cannot tell you that because it is information. But everybody knew he was a general and a minister of defense. At that time, while I spoke to him, he was outside the fence. He was at the compound, within the compound of the law faculty, but outside the building. And I asked whether he was afraid or not. He seems to be concerned at the time, and then we moved to the back of the building while we talked. In late afternoon, he himself and the colonel who were with him were arrested by the Khmer Rouge. That's what I was told. So I knew for sure that these two were arrested, but I did not witness the arrest myself, as I was on the first floor while he was on the ground floor.
Did you have the chance to talk to this general? And if you did, do you know if he went to the meeting that was held on the 17th of April at the end of the afternoon, where the senior ministers of Lon Nol's government were gathered together?
No, I did not talk with him about that. However, it is my conclusion that he met with them on the day earlier at 4 p.m. Rather, he would not meet with them because otherwise he would not be at the law faculty the next day. As I heard, senior people who went to the meeting were arrested.
You have told us about the law faculty. Is the building of the faculty in the city of Phnom Penh, is it the same building that is still the law faculty in Chamkamun, or is this another building that is outside the city of Phnom Penh?
The law faculty is still the current law faculty. It is in Chamkamun district in Phnom Penh.
Mr. Pinyatai, this morning you told us that you had seen Khmer Rouge leaders while you were leaving Phnom Penh. I believe you said that they were driving in a car. Can you confirm that for us, please? And also, tell us precisely when this occurred. And if you can, tell us who these leaders were as well.
I saw them before I entered the law faculty. At that time, I was driving my car slowly, and I saw them while we were along the Munivung Boulevard. At that time, the Khmer Rouge ordered us to go to the roadside as the convoy of the cars were coming from the opposite direction, so that we had to clear the road for that convoy to move. And there were about 3 cars in that convoy, and if I recall correctly, there was a black Mercedes-Benz. And inside that car, there was a man with glasses. He looked at us with a smile on his face. But of course, it was not that clear from afar as I looked at him through the car's window. So it is my conclusion that it was Son Sen who was sitting in that car, as there were not many people wearing glasses at the time.
During your wanderings, you met a certain number of individuals. Do you remember meeting somebody called Mrs. Yok Levin? And if you do remember, what kind of memories does this bring back to you?
Juk Levin, yes, I recall the name. But it was not while I was en route out of Phnom Penh. I met the person in Chư Khmer village. The person was also evacuated to that area, and the person was a woman, and if I recall it correctly, she had 2 children.
This is not directly connected with the facts, but it may be of interest notwithstanding. You managed to leave Cambodia. I believe it was during 1977. You took part in a certain range of activities to try and bring greater understanding of the situation in Cambodia. Can you very briefly tell us about those activities and tell us if you are aware of whether those activities had any impact on the leaders of democratic Cambodia, if there was any reaction at home to your testimony outside the country?
I left on the 22nd of June 1977. Immediately after my departure, the Thai authority questioned me. They questioned me a lot, and there were various parties who questioned me on the Thai side. There were also private investigators who questioned me, and some Western countries also interviewed me, and some journalists also questioned me. I was in prison because I had no passport at the time, and they detained me for about 1 week. Of course, the imprisonment there was much better than the living condition in Cambodia at the time, as sufficient food was provided while I was in prison. And later I was transferred to my route camp. And from that day I was interviewed by many journalists. Of course, I would not sit on my hand and quiet. Some of my family members had been killed and died. For that reason, I needed to spread the news through interviews. So I had been interviewed on many occasions by various journalists, and also by Mr. Roland Palango from France. He was from Le Monde. And there were journalists from Korea, from Japan, and TV reporters from the United States. And on the 13th of October 1977, France accepted my asylum request. And since then, I had traveled the world. I went to Paris, Ottawa, Washington, to Brussels. And at each place, I would hold a press conference describing the sufferings inflicted upon my family members and upon other people, and on those who died, on those who died of starvation, and on the survivors. Many questions were put to me, and I recorded all those questions in my notebook, so that I would have more ideas to talk at a later conference. At that time, the superpower countries, they supported the human rights, but of course to me their advocacy for human rights existed only in theory, and I was disappointed as there was no actions taken regarding the situation of suffering by the Cambodian people inside their country. And then I wrote a book in French. That was the first book I wrote. It was 420 pages. And 6 or 7 years later, I wrote a book. The first book that I wrote was entitled Murderous Utopia. And the second book that I wrote was Stay Alive, My Son.
Monsieur Pignata, je vous remercie.
Mr. Piñatai, I'd like to thank you very much for testifying here. I have no further questions to put to you. Thank you.
President, the floor is now given to Nuon Chia's defense to put questions to this civil party. You may proceed. Sonarun. Good afternoon, Mr. President, Your Honors, everyone in and around the courtroom. I and my colleague Vita Kupe, on behalf of Nuon Chia, we have no question for this civil party. I'm grateful, Mr. President. President, thank you. The floor is now given to Ieng Sari's defense to put questions to this civil party if you wish to do so.
Good afternoon, Mr. President. Good afternoon, Your Honors, and good afternoon to everyone in and around the courtroom, and good afternoon, sir. I do have a few questions. Let me start off by asking you, for the first book that you wrote, did you do any research for that book?
The first book was written in French. I need not do any further research because everything was in my memory. I started writing information in my notebook after I was released from the prison. And for that reason, the book was quickly published. It was published in later 1979.
All right. And then your second book, the one that we've been discussing here today, Stay Alive, My Son, the first edition was published, I believe, in 1987. Is that right?
Yes, that is correct.
Now, for that book, did you do any research?
For the second book, I did not do any further research. However, I'd like to add that the second book is also based on some contents of the first book. So for any researcher, the first book is important, and the second book is intended for the general public. And in fact, for my first book, I requested it to be translated into English. But they said that due to the large number of pages, and it is costly to translate it into English. And in order to make it shorter and focus more on the family issues, then it is easier for me to, based on the first book, I decided to go ahead to translate the first book together with one of my friends, and I still have the draft English translation of the first book. Then I edited that draft, added the contents related more closely with my family members to make this second book. Because my first book is mainly based on the facts and not really on the family members' issues.
Thank you, sir. Now, I don't mean to be rude, but my questions are rather specific. And so if I want explanations, further explanations, I will ask you. So if I understand you correctly, in writing the second book, you did not read any material, you did not do any research, you did not rely on anything other than your memory and what you had written before, which was based on your memory. Is that correct?
Yes, mainly it is.
Thank you. Now, I noticed that the second book was updated in 2000. Am I correct in that?
It was updated, yes, but the changes was the introduction only.
Okay. All right, that's what I'm going to get at. So we're going to go step by step. So in other words, other than the introduction, the rest of the book remained the same. You did not change anything. Is that right? Thank you. Now, I just have a few questions on some of the things that you wrote. Bear with me. Now, I understand from reading your book and from what I've heard here today that after graduating in 1965 with a degree in civil engineering, you began to work for the Ministry of Public Works here in Cambodia, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
And at some point, you became the director of the Department of New Works and Equipment, right?
I was the director, yes, not the chief, but the director in Khmer is in the U, not the Protein.
Right. I believe I said director, but all right. And can I ask, when was it that you became the director of this particular department? What year?
I cannot recall it clearly. However, it is probably in 1972 or 73.
All right. Okay. So it was during the Lenol administration that you advanced to that position, that you became the director of that department.
In fact, I was promoted, but before that I was already the deputy director of that department before my promotion.
Right, and we're going to get to that a little bit. And I want to go a little bit forward to the point when you were at the Faculty of Law and you ran into your former boss, General Tapana Ning. Judge Laverne just asked you about him. Now, in your book, you say he was the former Minister of National Defense and of Public Works. And just out of curiosity, was he holding both those positions at the same time, or was he Minister of the National Defense at a separate time when he was the Minister of Public Works?
From my recollection, and if I'm not mistaken, when the Khmer Rouge entered Phnom Penh, the Minister of Public Works was not him. He was at the time the Minister of National Defense. As there was another person, it was Mr. Ung Kropom Pka, who was also an engineer and became the Minister of Public Works.
Thank you. And there's maybe something lost in translation here, but am I correct to assume that you did not work for the Ministry of National Defense at any point in time?
The President, Mr. Subopati, please hold on until you see the red light before you proceed. You may now proceed. Response. No, I have never worked at the Ministry of Defense ever since I been graduated, I worked at the Ministry of Public Works all along.
Thank you. Now let's go back to when you first started working in the Sihanouk regime. And I'm looking at what you have written, and for everyone's convenience, it's page 4 in English, but it's the Khmer ERN number is 00588112. The French is 00587808. In the English, 005875540, page 4. Here you say, Sihanouk was the self-proclaimed father of the nation. And I want to stop here for a second. Why do you say that he was a self-proclaimed? Can you please explain what you meant by that? Did he himself anoint himself as the father of the nation? Is that what you're telling us?
Counsel Kim Min-ki, I may be heard, please. The President, civil party, please hold on. Counsel for the civil parties, you may now proceed. Counsel Kim Min-ki. Thank you, Mr. President. This question is not relevant. Even though my client wrote in the book, when it comes to the statement as indicated by counsel for Mr. Ieng Sary, it is not relevant and it should be rejected.
Mr. President, the gentleman wrote a book. The book was used by all the parties. It's fair game. Now, in the book, he talks about, for instance, about the nepotism and corruption that was rife during the Sihanouk period. And then he goes on to talk about corruption during the Lanol period. He served in both those administrations. One of the issues that has been raised in this courtroom was as to why people joined the Khmer Rouge. Some have opined that they were forced. We're entitled to present evidence to show that there was massive corruption, and he does write in his book that some joined the Khmer Rouge either because of the corrupt situation at the time and later on when Sihanouk urged people to join the Khmer Rouge. Therefore, I'm entitled to go into this area.
The President, Counsel Kanawaz is now instructed to continue putting questions, and please be brief.
Thank you, Mr. President. Could you please tell us very briefly why is it that you state that Sihanouk self-proclaimed himself to be the father of the nation? How did you come to that conclusion? Why are you making that statement?
The President, Mr. Sivopati, please hold on. The President, Council Pekong, you may now proceed. Council Pekong, thank you, Mr. President. I take issue with this line of questioning because the question appears to be asking the civil party to give his own or personal opinion on this.
Mr. President, you already ruled on the objection. This objection, I don't understand. It makes no sense. The gentleman has been giving his opinion all day long. Now, if he's good enough to give opinions when the civil parties ask for opinions, or when Judge Laverne asks for opinions, or when the prosecutor asks for opinions, why is it not good for the defense lawyers to solicit opinions from the gentleman? After all, he wrote this book. These are his words. He chose them. He's highly educated. Certainly, he must have an opinion on why he chose to put what he put in his book. Thank you.
The President, the question you just put was not really relevant, Counsel. You may proceed to another question.
Very well. You talk in your book that there were tales of nepotism and corruption during the Sihanouk regime. Could you please tell us what you meant by tales of nepotism and corruption? Describe to us exactly what was going on in Cambodia at the time.
Response. It was my observation at that time, and I noted that power came with some corruption. The more power people had, the more corrupt they were. So that's my opinion as an ordinary citizen. At that time also, and also the following years before the Khmer Rouge took control, the state departments did not have what we call the institutional power. The institutions were controlled by people rather than the institutionalized power itself. So that's what I noted back then.
And this is what you noted from working within the very same administration that you're telling us was a corrupt one. Is that right?
Response. That is my general observation. I did not refer to any particular ministry.
All right. Now, in the same passage, you go on to say that now, moreover, the war in Vietnam was at its height. Sihanouk, eager to stay on good terms with his powerful neighbors, had secretly given his agreement that the North Vietnamese could use the remote eastern areas of Cambodia for the transport of men and arms to South Vietnam. This, in its turn, drew the attention of the United States. Cambodia's traditional neutrality had been compromised. And then you go on to say, in reaction against these developments, Cambodia's own minute band of insurgents, the Khmer Rouge, led mostly by French-educated intellectuals, received a steady stream of support from disaffected Cambodians. Now, let me go back and ask a couple of questions on what you just wrote. If this was a secret agreement that Sihanouk had reached with North Vietnam, how was it that you knew about it at the time, at least when you wrote this book?
Response. I wish to make it clear that the book was written when I had already left the Khmer Rouge regime. I had experienced living during the Lon Nol, the former Prince Norodom Sihanouk's regimes, and the Khmer Rouge one. And the book was written from my collection of the paths. And the information that I stated as secret at that time was no longer secret. And when Prince Norodom Sihanouk was toppled down in March 1970, it was at that moment that the public released, or at least this secret information was released to the public domain.
All right. And so just to make sure that I understand you, up until March 1970, you were not fully aware, or maybe not even aware, of this agreement and the arms shipments that were going to the North Vietnamese. Thank you. Now, at some point, when the Lon Nol government told everybody what was happening, did they provide specifics? How much ammunition, what sort of weapons were actually being transported or being provided to the North Vietnamese through Cambodia? Did that ever become public?
Response. Yes, it did.
Well, can you please tell us a little bit so at least the rest of us know exactly what was happening here in Cambodia during the Sihanouk era before he was toppled by Lon Nol?
Response. I do not have the full recollection of this, since it happened a long time ago, but I remember that there was a demonstration started by a group of students against the embassy of the North Vietnam. At that time, there were the North and the South Vietnamese embassies, and people were not happy. The students were not happy with the North Vietnam policy. And we also learned at that time that North Vietnam took part of Cambodia territory and have it used as the place to transport their ammunition and other weapons. And Cambodian people had to move from their location because of the occupation of the Vietnamese. And also during the time when the conflicts happened in the in South Vietnam, there was some ill will, the business people and also politicians who traded rice transported from Cambodia into the territory then controlled by the North Vietnamese.
All right. Now let me just make sure I understand all of this. I think you're telling us that through Sihanouk, part of Cambodia was lost to the Vietnamese, was occupied by the Vietnamese. Is that what you're telling us?
Response. I think it is not right. The Vietnamese troop was walking past the Cambodian territory, and it was not a kind of offshoot. They did not temporarily, or rather permanently occupying the territory. They just walking past the area.
All right. Now, when you say that there was a steady stream of support from disaffected Cambodians as a result of all of this, when did you become aware that there was a steady stream of support from disaffected Cambodians that were joining the Khmer Rouge?
Response. I think I do not understand your question clearly. Could you please repeat it?
Apologies. Here is what you write. You talk about Sihanouk eager to stay on good terms with his powerful neighbors, had secretly given his agreement that the North Vietnamese could use the remote eastern areas of Cambodia for the transportation of men and arms to South Vietnam. And then later on you're saying, in reaction against these developments, Cambodia's own minute band of insurgents, the Khmer Rouge, led mostly by French-educated intellectuals, received a steady stream of support from disaffected Cambodians. So when did you become aware that the actions of Sihanouk led to a steady stream of support of disaffected Cambodians?
Response. I may have to go back a little bit to the historical part of the Khmer Rouge was formed by groups of students from France.
Let me stop here. We know the historical background. I'm asking what you wrote. You're making an assertion. Right or wrong, correct or incorrect, I don't know, but you're making an assertion that because of what Sihanouk was doing, a steady stream of disaffected Cambodians were joining the Khmer Rouge. Is that something that you knew back then, or is it something that you learned later when you wrote your book? Which of the two?
Response. At that time, I was aware, but not as much as I am now.
All right, so when you say you were aware, so as early as before Sihanouk was toppled, you were aware of what he had agreed with, North Vietnam, what was happening in certain parts of Cambodia, and that Cambodians were turning towards the Khmer Rouge as a result of Sihanouk's policies. That's what you're telling us here today, right?
Response. No, I think it is not right. I may have mistaken.
All right, well, let me go on and let's see if we can clear it up at some point. On the following page, page 5 of your book, and this would be in Khmer ERN 00588-113-14, French 00587-808-09, in English 00587541, again page 5. Going back to an earlier question, you say, I rose to become Director of the Department of the New Works and Equipment in the ministry, a position that protected me and the family from the political and economic consequences of the growing civil war. Let's pause here. What do you mean that this position allowed you to be protected, you and your family, from the political and economic consequences of the growing civil war? What did you mean by that?
Response. At that time, I was a person who had decent income, so my situation was better, and I also had to have another job so that we could maintain the status quo of decent living conditions. So I talked about my situation as opposed to others at that time.
All right. And may I ask if you recall what your salary was at the time? That's question A. And question B, I guess it would be, were you getting paid in real or were you getting paid in dollars?
Response. I don't remember how much I got paid, but I got paid in real.
All right. And you also said that you were doing other work as well. So am I correct in understanding that aside from working as the director of this department for the government, you also did private work for which you were getting paid separately?
Response. Yes, it is correct.
And may I ask what sort of work you were doing, who was your employer, and how were you getting paid?
Response. We created an enterprise. It's in French, a Bureau Ingénieur de Conseil, or it's kind of engineering enterprise. And I, at that time, was an engineer. I had to gather other engineers from public works or from the Ministry of Agriculture who find it difficult to meet the need to come and work to earn extra money apart from their current jobs.
All right. Maybe I'm losing something in translation. But what are you telling us is that while you were the director of this department, privately you're working with other engineers to get other public works that are basically being paid by the public domain, by the public budget? Because that's what I'm reading into your answer. Am I correct?
Response. At that time, at 3 or 4 p.m., we would finish our state work, and then we would do some part-time jobs, which is an outside job from the government task. So we earn money by working privately extra times.
Okay, thank you. Now, on the same page, you go on to say, although in French it would be the following page, you say, in 1970, to great acclaim, Sihanouk was overthrown by the Prime Minister and Army Chief, Leno, who promised to root out corruption and expel the Vietnamese. Sihanouk fled to Peking and astonishingly declared support for the guerrilla fighters, the Khmer Rouge, his previous enemies. Let me stop here. When you say that in 1970, to great acclaim, Sihanouk was overthrown, what do you, sir, mean by to great acclaim? What are you telling us?
Response. That was the political situation on the 18th of March 1970. At that time, Prince Norodom Sihanouk was in France. And back home, there was kind of controversy or conflicts. And the current government at that time sent a representative to invite him to return to his home country. But the king rejected, the former prince rejected, and he continued his journey all the way to Russia and to China. At that moment that he was toppled.
Let me stop you here. We know the story. What I want to know is why you chose the words to great acclaim. One might get the impression that the people, the Cambodians, or maybe just the politicians, or maybe people like yourself in the government, were happy to see him go. We're happy to see the coup d'etat. We're happy to see him overthrown. What do you mean by to great acclaim? Because you chose these words.
Response. People were happy about the event. The people in Phnom Penh, in particular, were happy that the king or the former prince was toppled.
All right. And if I could ask you during that period, if you could reflect back, the economic situation, the situation for the everyday Cambodian, at least in Phnom Penh where you were, what was it like? Was there enough food? Was there enough work?
Response. Are you referring to the moment prior to the coup d'etat or during the Khmer Rouge?
We're going step by step. At the moment, right around when Sihanouk was toppled, because you said people were happy to have him go. Why were they so happy? Was it because the economic situation would get better? Was it because of the corruption? Was it because of what he was doing with Vietnam? Why the happiness?
Response. As I could see, Cambodian people were not happy with the North Vietnamese invasion into Cambodia along the borders. That's why there were bombs dropped on some villages, and people also were scared and unhappy about this. And due to the rampant corruption and along with this invasion of the North Vietnamese to Cambodia, people were happy that the prince was toppled.
All right. And just as an aside, this rampant corruption, do you know by any chance, I don't want you to speculate, but do you know to what extent that would have been affecting the people outside of Phnom Penh? Because Cambodia is not Phnom Penh. So in the villages, in the other provinces, how was the rampant corruption during the Sihanouk era affecting those people, if you know?
At that time I knew about it, but right now I cannot recall the real events.
All right, thank you. Now, you go on to say, same page, that at first we had high hopes for Lano, but as time went by, it became clear that he was not up to the task he had set himself. He had a stroke and was partially paralyzed. And then you go on. The administration in the armed forces remained sunk in corruption and complacency. The army failed to make any impact on either the North Vietnamese or the Khmer Rouge, even with the help of the United States. So my question here is, when you say the Lano administration remained sunk in corruption and complacency, what do you mean by that? Were they as corrupt, if not more corrupt, than the Sihanouk administration?
That was my observation, and whether which regime was more corrupt, I could not say for sure, although corruption existed.
Can you please tell us whether the life, the ordinary life of the ordinary Cambodian outside Phnom Penh got any better during the Lano period?
Allow me to say this. During the Lano regime, there was no peace. After the topple of Prince Sihanouk, the war intensified. So it is my belief that people who lived outside the city did not have a normal lifestyle. The war broke out here and there, and it was advancing toward the city, and a lot of people took refuge in the city.
All right. And since you were living in the city, do you know whether those people coming into Phnom Penh, whether they were able to find food and shelter?
Majority of the time, there were non-government organizations who assisted the refugees by making camps for them and distributed rice to them throughout the cities.
All right. And in your opinion, was there not enough food, enough rice to go around for all those people who had come into Phnom Penh, all the refugees? If you know.
I said the majority, yes, because at that time rice were brought in either by sea or by air, However, when the war advanced toward the city of Phnom Penh, the food became scarce. And as far as I knew, a lot of families in Phnom Penh bought extra rice for additional 2 or 3 weeks period. But for poor people who fled to the city might face problem, who relied mainly on the contribution or distribution by various organizations at the time.
All right, thank you. Now let's fast forward a little bit to April 17th. April 17th, 1975, that's where we are right now. If I understand your testimony correctly and what you have written, the entire day of the 17th, you are in Phnom Penh. Is that right?
Yes, I was in Phnom Penh.
And I'm not quite clear, so please help me out here. During the 17th, were you able to move around the city? And did you, in fact, move around the city on that day, the 17th?
If you read my book, and as I stated this morning, early morning at dawn on this morning of 17 April, we left the clock and we met at my cousin's house in Phnom Penh, and then we went to Wat Ona Laom. If you listen to my statement this morning, you don't have to ask me this question.
Well, I just want to make sure I have a good timeline. And this may be important for other reasons. At what point when did you stop moving around on the 17th? What time of the day was it that you stopped at one place? And I believe it was the pagoda.
It was at the law faculty.
I thought the law faculty, you go there on the 18th, the following day. We're still on the 17th.
President, please observe some pause. Response. Yes, you are right. In fact, on that night of the 17th April, I was at Ona Laom Pagoda, and the next day I reached the law faculty.
Okay, and at what time, forgive me if I have to ask this question again, but at what time did you get to the pagoda? If you recall, what time of the day?
I reached Ona Laom Pagoda. That is after we had breakfast at my cousin's house, and a guard of my cousin's house, who was at the outskirts of the city, came to tell us that the Khmer Rouge arrived and asked us to leave the city. And with that news, we all decided to go to Ona Laom Pagoda.
Okay, now if you could please help me out here. About what time did you receive that news? So then you went off to the pagoda. At what time approximately?
It was in the afternoon.
All right. Thank you. So now in the afternoon, you get this news, and it's in the afternoon that you get into your car, or a car, and you drive to the pagoda. Do I have it correctly?
It was in early afternoon, that is after we had our meal, then we went to the pagoda.
And you went there by car. That's the point I want to make. what I'm trying to establish. You went there by car. Is that correct? Or did you walk?
We traveled by a car through the pagoda.
And was that your personal vehicle or somebody else's vehicle that somebody offering you a ride?
It was my vehicle.
All right. And so you told us that on the 17th you stayed at the pagoda, and it was the following day that you left. And that's when you went off to the Faculty of Law at some point, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
But before going to the Faculty of Law, you went to a house to collect some belongings. You drove, I believe it was your mother-in-law's house, I might be mistaken, to get some belongings, pack up the car, and then head off towards the direction where the Faculty of Law is. Am I right?
Yes, that is correct. But I did not go to my house. I went to my cousin's house. I left the house in the morning and I returned to the house. The house was located near the Monivong Boulevard, which was on the way to the law faculty.
All right. But you stopped at the house, right? You drove up to it and you stopped, right? When you got to the house, did you not stop the car?
Yes, we stopped the car. We went into the house to pick up some belongings. Then we returned to the car and left.
Now, when you say we, how many people went into the house to collect belongings?
All my family members, there were about 30 of us in total, as we had 3 cars, 2 motorbikes, and a bicycle, as I stated clearly this morning.
Again, my apologies. I'm trying to establish some chronology here. So if I have it right, it's 30, or is it 13 people? Which of the two? In English, I heard 30.
Okay.
So 30 people get out of these vehicles, they go into the house, they collect belongings, and then you leave. Can you please tell us how much time you were in the house collecting these belongings, all 30 of you?
I cannot recall the time. It's been 38 years, if you may know. But, of course, we could not stay there for long, and maybe we stayed there for about half an hour.
Well, did anybody rush you out of the house? Or did you stay there long enough to pick up whatever you needed to pick up, filled up the cars, and then left?
No, we rushed ourselves because the neighbors had already left. There were only a few families who were rather late, so we had to rush ourselves.
Right, but nobody rushed you. That's the point I'm trying to make. Nobody told you have 5 minutes, get your stuff, and get out of here. Nobody was there rushing you.
That is correct.
And then it was from there that you went to the Faculty of Law. That was your next destination. That was your next stop.
Yes, but our initial intention was not the law faculty. The main purpose was to leave the city of Phnom Penh. But when we reached the law faculty, it was open, so we decided to go inside the faculty.
You anticipated my next question. Nobody directed you to go to the law faculty. You chose that destination. You chose to stop there, and nobody prevented you at that point in time. And we're speaking of the 18th of April, 1975.
Yes, however, allow me to clarify that at that time when people were ordered to leave the city, if we were at the north, we would head toward the north. If whoever was at the south would head to the south. So for us, we were at the south, so we headed southward along Monivong Boulevard.
I totally understand. The point I'm making, you decided to stop, and you stopped. You didn't continue. Nobody forced you to stop. Nobody forced you to continue. You stopped on your own volition. You chose to stop.
Yes, that is correct.
Now, in your book, and this would be page 27 in English, for the Khmer ERN, it's 00588 139 to 140. French, 0058 7834 to 35. You say, over the next 2 days, the 19th and 20th, with nothing much to do but wander around and exchange gossip, I was surprised to see an occasional acquaintance, people I had met professionally once or twice. Let me make sure, I want to talk about this a little bit. The 19th and 20th. You're still in the Faculty of Law, correct?
Yes.
And it was while you were at the Faculty of Law on November 19th and 20th is when you were wandering around uninhibited. Nobody was preventing you from walking around, gossiping or talking to people, meeting people that you had come across. Is that right? That was your experience, in other words.
Yes, that is correct. President, the time is appropriate for a break. We shall take a 20 minutes break and we return at 3:05. Court officer, could you assist the civil party during the break and have him return to the courtroom at 3:05?
សូមអញ្ជើញក្រោកឈរ